This week, this particular week, has been filled with a great remembrance of September the 11th, 2001. No doubt, if we all stood individually, could share with the whole sanctuary where you were, what you were doing on that Tuesday in 2001, September the 11th. 17 years ago, but it is in the front of our minds and has been and should have been this past week. This is a time of remembrance for people of the Jewish faith as they began celebrating Rosh Hashanah on September the 9th, last Sunday, sundown. This significant time of remembrance culminates on the 18th with Yom Kippur, a time of remembrance. To be a Christian is to a certain extent an exercise in memory. And I say that over against a culture that sometimes seems to be obsessed with the now and at times with what's going to happen tomorrow. There is hardly any posture for a human being that can replace the posture of reflection and recollection. It is essential to the health of a community. It is essential to the health of a person. Not to mention the fact that remembering is also a source of tremendous pleasure in life. This time last year, Mary and I were traveling. Literally this time last year. We were traveling down the Danube River in Europe. We got on the boat in Bucharest, Romania. We went down the river to Budapest, Hungary. And we took our camera. And nobody likes to take pictures like my wife. And when she's not taking one, she's saying, "Oh, you take a picture. You take a picture." Someone said, "You really do not take a trip until you remember the trip." Many of our experiences become ours only in reflection. For example, do you recall your wedding? Do you recall that ceremony? One of the biggest remembrances for me of my wedding to my first wife, that's funny, I've only had one. You don't know me, do you? One of my biggest remembrances for me is one of, in terms of that wedding, is one of utter embarrassment. Now, we were going to be married at noon in Mary's home church. And it was a small town, and she grew up there, First Methodist of Madisonville, Kentucky. And she wanted to invite everyone in the Methodist church to our wedding. I am serving my first full-time pastorate in the town next door, Earlington, Kentucky, First Christian Church. And I felt like I should invite all of my members to the wedding. And since the wedding was going to be on December the 28th at noon, school is out, many people are out of work or off work, so there could possibly be a large crowd. And one of the things that had proven to be successful to me at the First Christian Church in Earlington was that I had a great big youth group, and we had a wild time every Sunday afternoon and evening. And as my wedding date approached, the kids in the youth group said, "Guess what we're going to do when you get married?" I said, "I don't know, but it better be nice." Oh, we're going to kidnap you. We're going to kidnap you maybe before the wedding. And if not before the wedding, we're going to kidnap you after the wedding. Won't that be funny? Well, I got to thinking about it, and some of those kids were pretty kind of wild, coal miners' kids. And I said to Mary, I'm kind of worried about this. And I said, you know, your cousin, Leslie, is a really good guy, and I'm going to ask Leslie, I'm going to hide my car, and then I'm going to ask Leslie to meet us at the front steps of the First Methodist Church, and as soon as the reception is over, that's back, some of you don't remember this, that's back when we went to the fellowship hall and we had a cup of punch and a cookie. No band, no sandwiches, cookie, punch. I said, I want you at the steps of the First Methodist Church with the motor running. I want you, because Mary and I are going to rush out of that reception, run down those steps, and jump in your car, and you're going to peel out and get me to my car. Well, he was there. We rushed down the steps. I got to the car. I opened the door on the passenger side. I put Mary in the back seat, and I got in the front seat. And we drove off into the sunset. Mary's in the back seat by herself, and I'm in the front seat with her cousin. And people took pictures of that and reminded me forever, how could you be so stupid? Now, to be a Christian is to a certain extent to exercise memory. I say that in spite of the traps and the dangers there are in memory. Sometimes it is dangerous to trust memory because memory sometimes gets to be rather selective. I remember our children saying at dinner time when we were living in Cleveland Heights for 30 years, our kids would come home from school and they would say, "Oh, I had such a hard time at school today. Nothing went right." And I just automatically would say, "You should have been in school with me." Sometimes I had to walk miles to school in the snow. Sometimes the school didn't have heat, and I didn't have a heavy coat. Of course, there are traps and dangers in memory, and some are even more serious. There are those who use their memories for demonic purposes. They absolutely refuse to forget certain things, and for them, memory is a cave. It is a cave for the nursing of hatreds and grudges. As someone said, I just remember this. I wish I knew who said it. I'd give them full credit. There are people who go out in their backyards every day, lift up a rock to make sure that the snake is still there. There are those kind of people, and we know some of them. In spite of all, memory is vital to life. Prisoners of war have survived and kept their sanity by memory, recalling significant dates, names, and events. That's why we've honored John McCain. He kept himself alive in the Hanoi Hilton for 5 years by reaching into the chest of memory and holding on to yesterday and somehow believing that there will be a tomorrow for him. In the early church, there were some Christians, rather heretical in many ways, who had a significant term to describe what it was like to be lost. The word they used was amnesia. To be lost in the world is to have forgotten who you are. To be a Christian is to a certain extent an exercise of memory. How far back can you remember? Can you remember back to when you were 6? Can you remember back to when you were 4? Well, somebody said to me long ago, one of my grandchildren, I can remember when I was 2. Yeah, well, I question that, but anyway, she's a pretty smart little kid. Then there are some who believe they can remember when they were here before, because they hold on to the doctrine of reincarnation. Now here comes, after all of this talk, here comes the meat of the sermon. I wish to state, whoever cannot remember any further back than his or her own birth is an orphan. If you can't remember back before February the 20th, 1940, Houston, then you are an orphan. Our memories should tie us to life that precedes our own birth, and we should be able to imagine a life that extends beyond our own death. Have you ever met someone who could care less about what happened before they were born? If you've met that person, then you have met a real conceited person. They live in a tiny little parenthesis in life. Nothing importance occurred before them, and as far as they're concerned, nothing of importance will occur after them. Conceited, a conceited individual. And whoever lives in such a way is an orphan. Now follow me here. The early Christian movement engaged in a major debate. Shall we keep our ties with Israel? See, that's what Paul's reflecting on in that passage I read. Shall we keep our ties with Israel? We're Christians now. We believe in Jesus now. Should we keep our ties with Israel? And shall we keep the Old Testament as a part of our Bible? I had an uncle in Texas. He was an elder in the Church of Christ. And his Bible always looked frightful because he had taken his Bible and he had torn out of his Bible. Think about how much this is. He had torn out of his Bible the entire Old Testament. I should have been a little more prepared for this. He has torn out that much of his Bible. And he would carry his Bible around with him. And I said to Uncle Everett one time, I said, "Why does your Bible look like that?" And Uncle Everett said, "Because I'm a New Testament Christian. I don't need the Old Testament." I suggested that he just go out and buy a New Testament, But then he wouldn't have anything to talk about. Thank God for some common sense. Some common sense prevailed, and the church recognized that there was a purpose in having the Old Testament. It has a place and a meaning and the larger story of God in the world. Jesus said in Matthew 5, "I did not come to destroy the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them." I don't think my uncle ever heard that phrase. The Apostle Paul in our text speaks gratefully of his own life in relationship to his people, the Jews. They are, he says, the roots of all that we are. To them belong the covenants, the worship, the promise, the patriarchs. In fact, from them came Christ. We cannot forget them. It is here that I want to take my hat off to the Jewish community. The Passover. They remember every year at Passover time the exodus out of Egypt. A young man is asked in the family at the Passover meal to tell the story. And when he tells the story, he is telling not a history of some people, but of his people. It's his history. Our Jewish brothers and sisters are in the midst of this high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The purpose is to contemplate what life has been in the past and to seek forgiveness and to pray that in the new year I will strive to get it right. One of my big heroes in preaching is Fred Craddock. Dr. Craddock has a wonderful story he likes to tell. the late Dr. Craddock. He says that he had traveled to Israel on one occasion, and he had hired a man in Tel Aviv to give him a personal tour around the country. And this particular day, they were going to drive from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And so the man said, "Do you mind if we take another route on an old road?" And Craddock said, that's fine, go for it. He said, he took me on this back road, and not too many miles down the road, he pulled over to one side and said, "We need to get out of the car." And he said, "I want to tell you about a battle between the Jews and their enemies." He explained that at the base of the hill, there had been an expected route the Jews would take into battle, and the enemy had stationed themselves in trees so they could ambush the Jews when they came. But the Jews heard of the plan of being ambushed. And so when they came around the backside of the hill and over the top, they were able to destroy the enemy. Dr. Craddock says, "When I asked my host, 'What war are you talking about?' and he said, 'I'm talking about the Maccabean War.' And Dr. Craddock said, 'Well, the Maccabean War took place in 165 BCE. And I said to him, "Do you realize that the way you told the story, you were telling the story as if you were a member of the army? And do you realize that you told it as if you were present?" And the old man said to Dr. Craddock, "I guess I was." See how important memory is? Do you hear any Christian saying, "Oh, we were in Antioch. We were in Corinth. We were in Ephesus. We were in Galatia. We were in Rome. We were in the catacombs. We were at the Plymouth Rock"? No, we like to talk about our private experiences with Jesus. And some of you are not going to like what I'm about to say, but if you have been paying attention to what I've been talking about, you'll understand what I'm about to say. The hymn in the garden, "I come to the garden alone." No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't come to the garden alone. You come with a host of people behind you that lived and died long before you were even thought of. To be a Christian is in part an exercise in memory, and whoever cannot remember any further back than his or her own life is an orphan. And that is precisely what Kevin read in the Old Testament passage of the morning. See the educational thing, how we try to tie it together? Let me paraphrase what Kevin read for us earlier. "If I forget thee, Bethlehem, if I forget thee, Nazareth, if I forget thee, Jerusalem, if I forget thee, Athens, if I forget thee, Rome, if I forget thee, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. For if I forget, I will without a doubt become a victim of the future." Amen. As we stand and sing.